So our first session of the day will start with a keynote. Ms. Yolanda, she's the head of digital engagement, Okado Group. She's a journalist by profession. Yolanda started her career covering national news in her home country, Venezuela. She then moved to London, where she started by working with a Spanish language team at the BBC World Service, doing radio and online, and later becoming a correspondent abroad. She also worked with domestic projects like BBC School Report and became the member of the digital development team, launching 12 new language services across the globe. Before moving into the corporate world world as a head of digital engagement for Okado Group, she was the head of social media for BBC World Service Languages, supporting 40 different teams from worldwide. So we welcome Ms. Yolanda Gil.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. Very happy to be here with you guys. So I don't know. Let me know. Shall we start the presentation? Shall we go on with the talk?
Yes, well, Yolanda, let's start by introducing yourself to all our participants. I've given you a, given your introduction here, though still, if we can hear from you personally.
Yeah, awesome. Of course, that was one of my slides, which I'm trying to figure out how I can play them from here. I don't seem to be able to share my screen or anything like that. Okay, like I said, it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I'm here to tell you a little bit about the lessons that I've learned from being a journalist that will help you figure out your content marketing if this is a strategy that you are pursuing for your individual companies. And yes, here is a bit about me. First picture, very old one, you can call it vintage. Those were my days as a reporter back in Venezuela. In that particular case, I remember that occasion very distinctively. I was at a party conference in a very hot day on the beach, and adequately dressed up for the occasion, your hat and your radio. I don't even want to tell you what year that was, because you're gonna guess my age, and let's not just get into that. But back in the day, I did all sorts, and I consider myself very lucky that one of my first jobs as a journalist was actually on a radio station. And because I was very young and very keen, I will be carted off to cover for people who will be sick or will be on holidays. So that meant that today I could be chasing a police car. Tomorrow I could be chasing the head of parliament, let's say, for example. So I learned quite a lot from that, and then went on to being a political reporter, which, as you can imagine, is also a tough job, especially in a country that is never boring, let's put it that way, like Venezuela. And then on the right-hand side, this is my current persona, let's call it that. That's me sitting at the Okado office. And the journey that I'm gonna talk to you about is how I can move some of the core learnings from being on the beat into helping companies build their brand and create a market strategy that people are gonna care about and are gonna engage with. But before I jump into that, I, of course, want to tell you a little bit about my current company, which is Okado Group. And for the this particular GIF is suggesting the idea of automated food. And that's more or less the broad title that you could give to the operation that I am a part of now. This is a video that will show you what Okado Group does is offer partners in the world, supermarkets, an end-to-end automated solution for grocery picking and distribution, which may sound very fizzy, as in, what is she talking about? So for that reason, I put in this video that shows you what we call the grid, or the iconic grid, which is probably is at the heart of the operation. It's a system that then goes and works in the warehouse, picking the groceries that have been ordered online by customers and then sent over using all sorts of different systems to assist the operation. So I'm just going to play a little bit of that video to give you a flavor of what that is. You can see here, these are the bots on the grid. They pick signals from the orders and they go down into these little holes in the hive. finding whatever it is that has been ordered, whether it's cereal, toilet paper, you can see that. And then the orders which have been assembled in that fashion are then sent into the vans that will distribute these groceries. So now to the matching hat, that's the kind of job that I do. So you can imagine it's quite challenging, because how do you sell this stuff all over the world with the aim of engaging your key audiences and helping the business do what it does best? Where does journalism and content marketing meet? It may not be obvious, but actually there are a lot of touching points across the two disciplines, as I hope I can show you. First and foremost, when you are creating a piece of marketing, whether it's an ad or what you call a thought leadership piece, it is always about the story. What does it mean when you are in the process of thinking, how am I going to push this brand? How am I going to help my company create more leads? How am I going to get my company to attract the right talent? When we're talking about the story, you are talking about two things. First and foremost, what's the big picture, right? So what is it that you want to push out there as a company? What are those key messages that you want to put across that are going to articulate your business to anybody at the other end and are going to help you achieve those goals? So that's the big picture when it comes to the story, right? Key messages at the top. And then when it comes to every individual piece that you're producing, it's about the top line. Because it's just not good, and this is one of the challenges that I face as a journalist transitioning, let's call it that, into the corporate world, is try and make my colleagues understand that it's not enough just to come up and say, I want to tell the world that I got the most awesome solution, because that's a message that necessarily just audiences are not going to even stop and click on. It's how you put that into a top line that then is going to hit the curiosity or the individual need of that member of the audience in order for them to engage with that piece. The second big lesson that I brought from journalism into content marketing is that basic rules apply. When you are working for a corporation, you very much need to bring with you some of the stuff that you will do routinely as a journalist, considering, for example, what's the timing of the piece that you're putting out there? What kind of language are you going to employ? And the short answer to point B in this slide is language obviously is all about speaking in the same way that your audience speaks and making it easy for them. So very elaborate kind of messaging is no good, for example, if you are trying to attract drivers to do your deliveries. Whereas very simple language possibly is going to leave your technological geeks that you're trying to attract in order to develop your software and your hardware underwhelmed. So it's about understanding how your audience speaks so that you can speak to them in the same language. Then you need to consider things like format. Again, it's not enough just to say that I want to put out this piece of content, which is often the request that you get from your colleagues in a corporation. You need to start considering, okay, then how am I going to make this happen in a way that is going to be engaging? Is this good for a video? Is this good for an online piece? Is this good for a social media post? Is it an Instagram story? Is it a tweet? All of these considerations are part of your planning process. Lastly, but by no means least, the visuals. I'm sure that the audience here is well acquainted with the fact that a large proportion of your message is carried on the shoulders of your pictures and your videos. So how are you going to illustrate that for digital? If it's very easy, I guess, in this day and time. In the past, you had to argue this stuff, but nowadays, who will think of just putting out a social media post without a visual? It's not the way it is in digital. So part of your planning is also that. For my particular case, this is a huge challenge because obviously being the core product, most of what I showed you on that video, how can I go beyond that visual of bots on the grid? You got to get creative in this stuff, and you're going to start tapping onto all sorts of imagery and even using, using recourse to things like animation, say, for example. On that front, you really have to push the boat out when it comes to creativity. And then, secondly, in terms of what the basic rules are, this may sound counterintuitive, but it really is not. The same goals that you have as a journalist in terms of making sure that the pieces that you're producing are factual and accurate and they're balanced, they apply when you are trying to come from the private sector and trying to do content marketing. In this day and time, it's very easy to sniff when a piece is not authentic, and it's very easy to debunk a piece that is not accurate. And as for balance, it's just a matter of good practice for you as a company to make sure that just not trying to tell the world that you are the best thing after sliced bread, because it's not going to do you any favors. If nothing else, it's just going to make you get across as a very arrogant company. So you are better off trying to introduce balance in whatever you put out there. Another lesson from journalists, and I've been touching upon this in everything that I've been saying, and trust me, this is actually the most challenging bit when it comes to coming into a company that necessarily have not been engaged with the ways of doing content in the context of content marketing or journalism. That lesson is your heart needs to be with the audience. The audience is at heart. Here, my Charlie Chaplin is just, trying to illustrate that you're not going to talk the same to this lovely lady here that you're going to talk to the mob over there. You need to understand these audiences and what their needs are and what is it that is potentially going to interest them, and how can you give them some value to whatever it is that you are putting out there. So my 2 points here is, first and foremost, you need to understand who your audience is. And the second point is, how can you help them? Again, coming to the example of telling the world that you're an amazing robotic company or any similar top line of that sort, how does that help anybody at the other side? Their challenge is how to turn that message into something that your individual audiences are going to find useful. But here's the trick. What audiences am I talking about when I say individual audiences? Well, in our case, being a B2B business with a very sophisticated and expensive product, we are talking about two groups of people that I call the money makers. One of them is obviously our investors. Ocao Group is a public company. And the other one is the current partners. That group of people who are not going necessarily make a decision on buying our product because they saw a Facebook post, they, on the other hand, who have invested millions and millions of dollars on our solution, with reassurance that they made the right decision. So for them, that's probably the biggest need that we need to fulfill in my particular case. Outside of these two groups of the money makers, there are what I put in the same bucket, because I think they are the two sides of the same coin: your current employees and your potential employees, or your candidates. For us, this is a particularly acute challenge, because in order for us to deliver the solution across the world, we need to be able to hire an important number of highly specialized roles in places where they've never heard of our name. That means in order to support that activity, we need to pave the way and create some level of brand awareness amongst these groups of people. And again, if you start looking at the nitty-gritty detail, it really gets complicated, because like I said, you're not going to talk the same way to a potential delivery driver that you're going to talk to a potential Java developer. So understanding all of the nuances of these people is going to facilitate your job to a great extent. And that's the lesson. You need to first and foremost be thinking of them and then figure out how you address these audiences. So I mentioned the work pay, which for us is our main framework. This is how we put everything together. We utilize this as a planning tool to implement every piece of content that we want to undertake. So before we go out and put together a story on, say, how one of our warehouses came back and was rebuilt after a significant fire a couple of years ago, we first and foremost figure out what's the purpose of that piece? What are we going to achieve as a company by putting out this piece of content? Secondly, who is the audience that we're going to try to engage with using this piece of content? Third, the value, which I've mentioned also. How is this piece bringing any value or otherwise any reason for this member of the audience to engage with this piece? And lastly, we figure out the elements of the execution in which you are considering things like format, timing, visuals, time scale, what are your sources, how are you going to balance them out, etc., etc. We call this the pay framework, and we apply it to any piece at the point of commissioning. That means if we cannot justify this piece from the point of view of the company, as in providing us with a purpose, and if we cannot identify how we can bring value to a specific audience, and we cannot figure out how we can make it happen, then the piece doesn't get off the ground. And as I hope you can see that this is how it all ties together. So that's in terms of what you learn from journalists that you can bring into content marketing. But what about you as a journalist, the skills that you can bring along? Well, I think every time that anybody asks me a question, I realize in terms of how I convinced the company that this was the way forward, how I put together my business case, how I managed to hire a team of 10 people who are working with me, I see myself realizing that I'm only being a journalist about it. What I think a journalist can bring to this proposition in terms of the skills that they're very well acquainted with includes the capacity of finding, organizing, and effectively communicating complex information. That's what journalists do, bottom line. And that you can take anywhere you go, any job that you want to apply for and embark on a different journey as a journalist. So for example, how did I find out what the business needed? Well, I interviewed a large number of stakeholders. You can put it that way. How did I put together my business case? Well, based on my research, from the interviews that I conducted with the stakeholders, plus understanding the basic rules of marketing and the basic rules of creating a brand. And how did I manage to convince them all? Well, effectively communicating. So you can see I do love a GIF, and whether this is a good strategy or not, I'm not entirely sure still at this point, but certainly my presentations, even to the CFO of the company, are full of them because I believe that they communicate and they do it in a very effective way. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to tell you this morning. So I don't know if there are any questions from the room. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Yolanda, for sharing your story about moving from a journalist into a digital marketing. And yeah, it was quite amazing presentation, filled with Charlie Chaplin. That brings a lot of image to me about comparing what your thoughts are. And it was a great story to start with, and then applying on the rules and setting up with the audience. Okay, and how the travel was. A really interesting one to hear. Thank you very much, Yolanda. So, participants, that's the lesson that Yolanda learned from journalism and how to figure out in the digital marketing space. So, attendees, if you have any questions, you can start typing through the chat. We follow the chat, and on behalf, we would take up the questions to Yolanda, or maybe your views on a presentation. So if you have any questions. So Yolanda, starting with the story that we want to develop in the content. When you said about the big picture, really want to strike that a little bit more about how do we, see through the audience.
How to see through the audience in terms of figuring out what that big picture is. Is that the question?
Yes.
So again, I will put this into the bucket of the challenges because I am here and I'm with the company. What I tell the communications team as a whole is, you guys tell me what you want to say, and I will tell you how to make it happen on digital. Problem is with a company that is young in the sense that is only very recently moved from the B2C space into the B2B space, is that necessarily all of these building blocks that will tell you what the overall communication strategy is, what the key messages are that we want to push out, what are, even if you talk about, say, employees, what's the employee value proposition if you wanted to capture the attention of job candidates. These building blocks are necessarily not in place. So I am a very pragmatic person, and what I've been doing with the team is, if I don't have a clear steer from the company at this moment in time, because the company is still in the process of figuring out what all of these building blocks should look like moving forward, I take a very pragmatic approach. And again, based on what I know from talking to stakeholders, I formulate what I call interim solutions, which we then go on and build marketing or content on. Let's say, for example, last year, our key content campaign, I argue with the team that if we were the top war automated solutions provider in the ways that I've shown you, that I gave you a little flavor of what we do. My argument to the communications team was, well, the space that we need to occupy as a company is that space that tells everybody that you are the leaders. Hence, let's make a campaign on what the future of online groceries look like. So let's explore what it looks like from the point of view of the supply chain, right? So in the future, how are the tomatoes going to go into the warehouse? Yeah, because at the moment, it's still all very much a manual process. So we look at things like vertical farming, which is one of the areas that the company is exploring in terms of technology and how to make it part of the proposition. Then we said, okay, then, so if at the moment we have these automated warehouses, what does it mean from the for the job market? What are the skills in the future? What are the skills that in the future are going to be working in order for us to get our groceries delivered to our houses? You can imagine that also this whole campaign, we did it in the middle of the COVID pandemic, where online groceries became such an important thing for many people all over the world. So that threw the company into the limelight, literally. And it seemed to me as if we were missing on a huge opportunity by not occupying this space and telling the world that, okay, fine, anybody can have an opinion on what the future of online groceries look like, but we are the experts. Hence, we're going to occupy this space and we're going to produce a number of pieces on the subject, and then let everybody else have a debate about it. So from that point of view, you can see that, yes, I don't know what the key messages are, but this seems so obvious that I felt that doing a marketing campaign on that was just the natural thing to do, especially in the context of the pandemic.
That was nice. And content is actually a journey, right? I believe that. And also that is the start for the revenue. It is the key for revenue as well. Yes. So audience, attendees, if you have any questions, you can also raise hand. We will be able to allow you to unmute, and you can raise a question directly to Yolanda as well. And Yolanda, regarding this, about the purpose, I would say, when we set up the audience to find out the purpose behind, the marketing purpose, how do we actually visually reach them? Like, obviously, yes, your presentation was, appealing with Chaplin. So does that belong, like, carrying with a moving image or, a 2D image?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last two things you said.
About the moving image, like, the GIF image, or how does it appeal these days? We are.
Oh, well, I don't know about you. I just love them. I think they're incredibly effective. Incredibly effective. People remember them. Whereas if you just put a slide full of text. People are not going to remember this. You may go away and in your head, you'll have some Chaplin guys, you know, dancing in your head. And hopefully one or two of the ideas that I just put across to you will stick. Maybe Chaplin with the pistol, the story is the main thing that you need. Maybe Chaplin hugging the broom to tell you that the audience needs to be at the heart of everything that you do. So you need to use the recourses that are going to put across your story. I said this to my boss the other day. There's a difference between trying to say something and trying to convey something. So say something is very easy, right? What do you want to say? There you go. There's a tweet. There's a Facebook post. There's an Instagram post. But how do you make sure that that point that you're trying to make gets across? So that's conveying the point. And that's when you need to get creative and start thinking of course, it needs to be adapted to the audience. If I try to use GIFs with an investor's audience, it's probably have the opposite effect, clearly, because, you know, it's a very kind of formal environment. And that audience in particular expects a different kind of communication. Having said that, our latest project was precisely the financial results that we needed to deliver online because of pandemic. And we did push and push and push for a more creative approach. A normal financial results presentation, you may be acquainted with this, will entail a speaker with slides. So it's a talking head and a slide full of numbers. We said, fair enough, we get that. That's trying to, you know, to move online, something that you will do in an auditorium, right? Because there'll be a person talking and then a bunch of slides behind them. So what we said, that's fair enough. But when you're in an auditorium, I don't know, you're sitting duck in there, you're just, you know, whereas if you're online, you're totally capable of just, you know, browse your phone, stand up and talk to your mother, go to the toilet, X, Y, and Z. Is capturing attention online is much more challenging. So how do we push the proposition so that this audience will watch our message and stay with it throughout? So for that reason, for the last financial presentation is we couldn't get away from the slides completely, as in we had our CFO do slides, but that was a 10-minute segment. The entire presentation was 55 minutes long. So the way we did it is we had a variety of different formats. We had your chairman just giving a speech to begin with. Then we have a conversation in the canteen, in our HQ, just sitting there, talking about the future of the company and the challenges. Then we had the slides with the CFO. And then we had a segue into what we call the chapters. So different leaders from the company were talking about things that make us strong. So there were 5 themes. One is resilience. The other one was problem solving. The other one was innovation. The other one was speed. And lastly, partnerships, right? So we had a leader talking through all of this. And the way that we sewn this together was using the grid, that image of the boats moving. So we went into the grid because we needed to turn it 90 degrees down. Okay. We had to use an animation. And then from that animation, each one of these leaders will pop out as if they were popping out of these boats, if that makes sense. I mean, it's difficult to describe, but you get the gist. What I'm saying is...
Yeah, I can visualize, yeah.
All right, that's awesome. All I'm saying is for online, you need to go the extra mile. It's just not enough. So even on something so formal like a financial presentation, there is some wiggle room to do these kind of things. Okay, I didn't have a GIF, fair enough. But I had bots that turn into an animation. And that you know, it's not a common thing to see for this kind of content.
All right. You know, actually there was content confirmed, like, you know, on the presentation. So we have, we have a request from Jonas, who's requesting for you to repeat on the rules that we were talking about, you know, the title, language, the format, and the visuals. So
the basic rules, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the basic rules, you have 2 buckets of rules, right? So one is regarding mostly the execution of your piece, and the other one is regarding the background, let's call it the deep end of your piece. So with regards to your execution, you need to be considering your timing, your format, your visuals, And the last one at the moment is
Language.
language, exactly. And then on the other pocket, you're looking at accuracy, balance, and factual information.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Yolanda. So attendees, if you have any other questions, you can chat or you can raise your hand. So yeah, anything else from you, Yolanda? Like, it was a lesson that we learned from you as well, starting with a big story, understanding the rules, applying, understanding the rules and understanding the audience and put in a framework. Especially I love the framework, PAVE. Nice word, like, nice acronym that you have.
PAVE is very effective.
Yeah, it also leads you to some path, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
the acronym is awesome. The acronym actually talks about the purpose, audience value, and the execution of the program. So that's how Yolanda succeeded. So attendees, thank you so much, Yolanda, for your time. Thank you all the attendees for the session. Yep. So we will move on to the next session quite soon. So please stand by. Thank you, Yolanda, for your time.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure.